The air in 18th century Eastern Europe was thick with expectation. For generations, Jewish communities had yearned for salvation, their hopes often buoyed and then shattered by non-messiahs. But the legacy of Sabbatai Zevi, though officially condemned, still whispered through clandestine circles, promising a radical path to redemption. In the shadows of this fervent longing, a new protagonist was emerging, a man who had traveled far, absorbed forbidden doctrines, and returned with an unwavering conviction that he was destined to complete the messianic work. The stage was set. The longing for redemption was palpable. Now, Jacob Frank, transformed and resolute, was about to step into the light, claiming a divine mandate to fulfill a long-awaited destiny. Having immersed himself in the radical Sabbatean teachings of the Ottoman Empire, Jacob Frank returned to his native Podolia in the mid-1750s. But this was not the same Yaakov Vine who had left years prior. He carried with him a distinct aura, an air of profound conviction and mysterious knowledge. His travels had forged him into a figure of magnetic charisma, fluent in multiple languages, and possessed of a worldly sophistication that set him apart from the local rabbinic establishment. He wasn't just a merchant anymore. He was a prophet, a seer, a man who had glimpsed the hidden truths of the universe. He spoke of new ways, of liberation from old constraints, and of a radical path to redemption. This message resonated deeply with the disaffected Jews of the region, those disillusioned by traditional rabbinic authority, impoverished by ongoing strife, and yearning for a messianic upheaval that would shatter their mundane existence. They were ripe for a new vision, and Frank was ready to provide it. Frank's ascent was fueled by his extraordinary charisma. He possessed a commanding presence and an uncanny ability to connect with people on an emotional level. He didn't preach in synagogues or engage in scholarly debates. Instead, he gathered his initial core group of followers in private, clandestine meetings, speaking in parables and cryptic pronouncements that hinted at profound, world-altering truths. He promised not just spiritual enlightenment, but a tangible, revolutionary new order, a world where the old laws would be broken and true freedom would be achieved. He offered liberation from the perceived spiritual stagnation of traditional Judaism, appealing to those who felt oppressed by strictures and frustrated by the delayed messianic promise. His words were a balm to their anxieties and a spark to their rebellious spirits, forging an intense, almost familial loyalty among his earliest adherents, who would become known as the Frankists. Central to Frank's burgeoning movement was his explicit, audacious claim. He declared himself the spiritual heir, the living embodiment of Sabbatai Zevi. He didn't just admire Zevi, he saw himself as the fulfillment of Zevi's unfinished mission, the one destined to bring about the final cosmic redemption. Frank masterfully adopted and twisted Sabbatean symbolism, interpreting Zevi's controversial conversion to Islam not as an apostasy, but as a necessary descent into the depths to redeem holy sparks. He taught that the world was still trapped in a state of chaos, waiting for the living Messiah, meaning himself, to complete the process. This wasn't merely a theological succession, it was a psychological one. He cultivated the mystique of a messianic figure, demanding absolute devotion, presenting himself as the only true guide through the coming spiritual apocalypse. With his messianic claims established, Frank began to organize his followers into a tightly knit community, referring to themselves as brothers and sisters. This wasn't a loose association, it was a devoted, often secretive brotherhood that practiced rituals radically different from traditional Jewish life. They held clandestine meetings, often in remote locations where Frank's teachings were disseminated and communal bonds were strengthened. These gatherings were rumored to involve practices that openly defied rabbinic law, or halakha. While the full extent of these early rituals remains debated by historians, it's clear they sought to shatter conventional morality, pushing boundaries in ways that would have been utterly scandalous to mainstream Judaism. For Frank and for his followers, these transgressions weren't sins, they were necessary acts, steps on the radical path to the new order, paving the way for a deeper, more pathier, spiritual form of holiness. Such radical departures from Jewish tradition could not go unnoticed for long. The traditional rabbinic authorities of Poland, ever vigilant against heresy, quickly recognized the inherent danger in Frank's teachings and his burgeoning cult. They immediately perceived the Frankists as a direct existential threat, not just to established Jewish law, but to the very fabric of communal life. These were not just different interpretations, these were actions that undermined centuries of faith and practice. Initial clashes were inevitable, marked by denunciations, excommunications, and the growing chasm between Frank's audacious vision and the conservative guardians of Jewish orthodoxy. His teachings were a direct assault on the foundations of Jewish law. The lines were drawn. A holy war was about to begin. Jacob Frank had returned not merely with a message, but with a declaration of war against the spiritual status quo. His teachings were a direct assault on the foundations of Jewish law, morality, and tradition. The lines were drawn. For Frank and his brothers and sisters, it was a path to ultimate liberation. For the rabbis, it was an unprecedented apostasy that threatened to unravel everything. A holy war was about to begin, one that would redefine heresy and shake European Jewry to its core. Join us next time as we delve into the shocking core of Frank's doctrine, the radical notion of finding holiness through sin. You won't want to miss it.